Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Kennedy, and like Bo said, I'm a first-year MTS student, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Michael Hanegan for our next speaker. Michael Hanegan is the founder of the Center for the Future of Learning and Work. He is an adjunct professor of generative AI learning and work at University of Central Oklahoma and Rose State College. He is the co-author of Generative AI in Libraries, Claiming Our Place in the Center of a Shared Future, and his recent work includes a series of micro-credentials related to generative AI and theological education as a part of the Faithfully Co-Creating series, with nice little brackets around the AI and faithfully, sponsored by the Association of Theological Schools, ATLA, and the Intrust Center for Theological Schools. And he lives in Edmond, Oklahoma. And I'm happy to introduce him for a talk on Ad Fontes in the Age of Intelligence, Generative AI, the Reformation, and the Future of the Tradition. Join me in giving him a round of applause.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to what is always for me an overly aggressive and ambitious project. So we'll see how this goes here. No, you're fine. Wonderful. I do not seem to be clicking in it. There we go. Okay. I want to tell you where my journey begins here. My theological work is in the consequences of trauma, both for the individual and collective life of faith and their subsequent implications for the development of theological traditions. So in other words, when things go bad, what does it do to you and everybody who carries on afterwards? Which means that in my graduate thesis, I spent a lot of time with John Calvin. It's not very hard to find the trauma in the life of John Calvin. In fact, one of my favorite biographies of Calvin says this about his anxiety. All human beings may be anxious, some individually, in groups, and from time to time are more anxious than others. Calvin was a singularly anxious man. And as a reformer, fearful and troubled, his anxiety drove him through his career of strenuous and distinguished accomplishment. And it found expression in his thought in ways of which he could scarcely have been conscious. Or as my church history professor used to say, if Calvin could have slept, there would have been no Reformation. The reality is that for Calvin and for all of us, there are a lot of things that shape and reshape and misshape us. For Calvin, one of those was his anxiety, or conflict, or trauma, or hope, or belief, or even technology. The reality is all of these things shape, reshape, and misshape us. And part of the reason that I want to highlight all of these collectively is that it is easy when we talk about AI to just talk about how technology shapes, reshapes, and misshapes us. But this is a technology that is uniquely reflective of the human experience, which means in some sense, the anxiety, the conflict, the trauma, the hope, and the belief are all baked in to the technology that we're trying to wrap our head around in generative AI. 500 plus years on, the Reformation is big, it's complicated, it's expansive. You may know more as a Reformation scholar than any Reformation scholar before you, but that takes up an increasingly small and diminishing part of the larger things that we know. And in fact, I loved this quote that Jennifer brought up earlier. In fact, I found it because of one of her pieces. And here was my problem. I couldn't find where it was from. And I've spent enough time getting slapped in seminary to know that if I can't find where it's from, I probably shouldn't attribute it to someone. And so I wondered, was this just, we presume that Luther has said so much that it has become kind of the lore and the legend, but whether or not this was actually true. We're going to come back to this in a little while when we talk about AI. But for Luther, technology was essential to his work and to the Reformation as a whole. The printing press itself was an arrival technology. So how many of you remember when you got your first cell phone, right? For those of us who are not in our 20s, our first cell phone did not fit in your pocket. We made most of our phone calls after 7 p.m. and we didn't do text messages because they were 10 cents a piece and you had to say 2244433, right? It wasn't a meaningful form of communication. How many of you remember when you transitioned from that to a smartphone, right? Both of these are examples of what we call adoption technologies. This is a technology that I chose to participate in. An arrival technology is not like that at all. An arrival technology is technology that changes the world in which you live, whether or not you participate. It does not care how you feel. It changes the way that you experience the world. It is rare, it is consequential, and it unlocks all kinds of things, both for society and technology. We could probably name on two hands the arrival technologies that have shaped the modern world. The printing press, the steam engine, electrification, the internet. There are not very many. Generative AI is also an arrival technology, but I would say two things here. One, generative AI is an arrival technology that will be more consequential than all previous arrival technologies combined, and that it breaks all the rules of arrival technology. I was joking earlier that I don't know after today if you will feel better or worse. My hope is that you will be curious even if anxious. Here are some of the ways that this breaks the rules. You and I are used to technology that moves incrementally. Your iPhone 14 is not remarkably better than your iPhone 13. What you notice, because you're not an engineer, is that your battery doesn't die as fast. But fundamentally, there is little distinguishable difference. But if you took your first cell phone and your current phone, they would feel an awful far distance apart. My grandfather was born in the 1920s in rural Oklahoma. No running water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. In his 90s, he was reliving road trips on his iPad on Google Earth using 3D satellite imagery of the places where he had driven as a younger man. That is a lot of change in one lifetime. But when you zoom out, two things are true. One, my grandfather never woke up one morning and said, I don't recognize this world. And two, if you look at the long tail of change from 1929 to 2017 when he died, it's a pretty incremental move. It gets slightly faster, but it's still incremental. Generative AI is not incremental. It is exponential. And that is hard for human beings to wrap their head around. Human beings are not good psychologically at understanding exponentials. Let me give you an example. If I were to ask you to think about medicine 100 years ago, this would be weird. It's hard to think about what is no antibiotics, what is, it's even hard to conceive what medicine is 100 years ago. But then if I said, consider medicine 100 years from now, this is even a more difficult extrapolation, right? But what if I told you, and I'm being completely serious here, that with the current pace of change with generative AI, I think whatever we would have previously expected to do in 100 years of medicine, we will do in 10. What happens to your brain? Mine just turns off at this point because exponentials are hard for humans. We have built the world in which we live because we've been able to look in the distant, in the remote, not in the remote past, but in the recent past, and extrapolate the near future. We are not good beyond those spaces. The other piece is that arrival technologies have typically been isolated. So the steam engine was only in manufacturing, and electrification came for the big cities first. And in the small towns, it didn't matter, even for a long, long, long time later. Generative AI is touching every part of our life simultaneously. It is in manufacturing, it is in medicine, it is in the invisible infrastructure of the society in which we live. It is not going to start in the corner and move to the center of the house. It is already pervasive in the entire place. And the other experience is that our traditional experience of technology, especially of like software and hardware, is that it's always a mixed bag. Anybody remember the Microsoft, the Windows 95 2000 XP years? Where when it was time to upgrade your computer, you just prayed that it survived, right? And that if you were to go back, it would, if going forward didn't kill it, going back wouldn't do it too. And we weren't sure how this would go. With the way that generative AI is designed, what it is today is the worst it will ever be. What it is tomorrow is the worst it will ever be. It will only and always only get better. We don't have a category to make sense of technology that functions in this way. Generative AI also moves differently in speed, in scope, and in scale. I often joke that 1 year in the real world is 100 in AI land. And it's not that much of a joke. I could tell you story after story of times where, even in the last 18 months, we've said, you know what, we just don't know how to do this. There's just no way. And then 9 months later, we're like, well, we might have an idea. And then 6 months after that, we say, you know, we think we've got this licked. I wonder if, and then we go, oh, you know what? It's actually not that difficult. Here we are. In scope, the challenge we have here is that generative AI is not a tool. So often when we talk about tools, we talk about ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever kind of application that you want to talk about. But we forget that generative AI is a technology, not a tool. Much in the same way that a light bulb is a tool, but electricity is a technology. And so part of what we have to recognize is that our experiences of tools are not reflective of the limits of where the technology itself is being applied. And we'll look at some of those here in a little bit. And then the last piece is about scale. Here in scale, what we see is that this technology is being applied in all sectors simultaneously, and that it changes both the speed and quantity of our work. And we'll look at some ridiculous examples of this shortly. Let me just compare for you a couple things about the printing press and generative AI. For the printing press to reach mass adoption, at least from the consensus that I can find, we're looking at about 50 years. For generative AI, for ChatGPT, it took to get to 100 million users, 58 days. It is now used by 800 million people every week. Just that tool, not the technology, that one tool. That is 12% of all adults on the planet at least once a week. Or if we think about the capital cost for end users, right? So in this case, the printer, and in this case, me. The consensus that I could find, and of course, Jennifer, is always for you to say, nuh-uh. But what I could read was that it would often take, to begin a press from scratch, 4 to 6 years of income. Do you know what it costs to use the world's leading AI models? Free. That's weird. That's not our experience of technology. Our experience of technology is the nice version is available for people who can afford it, and the crappy version is available for you to try to entice you into the best. And that is not what is happening here. Or we think about the printing press producing a text, maybe a text at a time, maybe multiple texts, but for now, this press is one page. Generative AI already does text, audio, video, imagery, code, and other forms of media. For the printing press, for you to take advantage of the technology of the printing press, you had to be able to read. A book in my hand and no literacy does me nothing, except cost me money and give me something to carry. Generative AI does not require literacy. You can engage by voice. You can engage in video. You can engage in imagery. You can engage in text. You can say, you know what, I don't really have time to read this paper. Can you just go ahead and like make me an interactive web page that gives me the gist? Sure. Which is great because I don't write code very well. For the printing press, it's one language at a time. The general out-of-the-box tools that are free and publicly available are nearly omnilingual right now. It doesn't matter what language you put in. It doesn't terribly matter what language you want to put out. You can change it up in the middle if you feel like it. Or this is great for me because I will often say, you know what, I could read what Jennifer said about the French Bible, or I can just put a French Bible in there, even though I don't read French, right? Because the technology itself can. The printing press captures human learning, and generative AI is really genuinely the first technology that creates human learning, right? We think about like the printing press and the internet, and we think about academia, and we think about these are the places where we've done learning and now we make it concrete. But now we have a technology that enables us to make novel, genuinely novel learning. It allows us to synthesize information in ways that are not humanly available to us. So yes, technology shapes and reshapes and misshapes us. And generative AI will do this in ways that I don't know anyone can tell you what it will be. When people say there are open questions in generative AI, it is the truth. That most of the times we just don't know. Let me give you a glimpse about what's currently possible. This is like already publicly available. The 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to two people who created this tool. Well, I mean, obviously a larger team, but they were awarded for this. This is AlphaFold 2, which has now been surpassed by AlphaFold 3, and by the end of the year or early next year, AlphaFold 4. We've been working on protein modeling as a computational problem since the 1970s. So from 1970 to 2023, we had modeled 1% of known proteins, which is important for drug discovery. This is what a protein looks like. It looks like your iPhone headphones when they've been in your pocket all day, and you got to pull them out and get on the phone. To model one protein requires 4 to 5 years of PhD level work. A student enters a PhD program, that is their job. Congratulations, you need to model this protein. In 2023, AlphaFold modeled them all. 200 million proteins. This is 1 billion with a B, 1 billion years of PhD level work done. Publicly available on the internet, used by 1.5 million scientists around the world every day. I don't have a category to think about 1 billion years of PhD level work, much less that it's already done and you can just go get it. Or Google recently released a tool made for identifying parallels in Latin inscriptions. They thought this was a fun side quest with historians. They took historians and said, hey, do you have some Latin inscriptions that you haven't figured out how they relate to all the other Latin inscriptions? Come play with this tool. And they're like, this is amazing. And they said, hey, how much time did you save by using this? And one historian said, this would have taken me about 4 years. And it took a couple weeks. When they were done doing all their Latin work, they were like, hey, I wonder what happens if we throw a papyrus at this, and it worked just fine. And so now they're trying to explore, well, what else can we throw at this thing? One of my favorite archivists that I follow on Twitter is recently trying out the new Gemini 3, which should be out in public to all of us on our cell phones by the end of the year. And this is his kind of benchmark. This is a letter written from a man to his wife. This man is not very well educated. He has not great handwriting for his time, and there are a ton of spelling errors. A year ago, generative AI would have transcribed this and fixed all the errors because it presumes that you want to look like you know how to spell. However, Gemini 3, with appropriate instructions, about one paragraph, it took this historian about 65 seconds to get this ready, now says that typically he is getting between 95 and 98% accuracy just by taking a picture with his phone and saying, can you transcribe this for me? Thank you so much. That's going to make work in things like the Kessler collection a lot of fun. Or this is now a year old. This strikes me as wild that this is a year old now. This is from a material scientist at MIT. So he took 1,000 papers in material sciences, fed them to an AI and said, I want you to make a knowledge graph of these, make a complex relationship of all of this material science information. And then what I want you to do once you've kind of learned all of these papers is I want you to go to art and find some inspiration for a material that doesn't exist yet. And so it said, these papers are interesting. And I really like this painting from Kandinsky. Here's mycelium material that might be used in X, Y, and Z. This is how you would make it, and this is what I think you should do it for. And MIT material scientists have spent the last year building this material. And it's open source and you can play with it if you want to. Or this is Notebook LM, which is a publicly available tool where you upload materials, audio, video, text, and you can engage with an AI-generated podcast that will summarize this material for you. You can call into the show and ask a question that's not contained in there across the text. And just this morning, it was upgraded to a 1 million context window, which means you can ask any question you want across 75,000 words at a time. I cannot ask anything of my brain across 75,000 words at a time, but you can anytime you want. Or I have access to a tool, which is not yet publicly available, with a knowledge base of 100 million tokens. That is 750,000 words. Over my research for the last 18 months, I have over 1,000 papers from my own research and work that I have put in here, and now I can ask any question I want. And you can see down in the bottom, I have used 6 or 9% of my available capacity. And finally, back to this quote from Luther that Jennifer turned me on to, but I couldn't find. I found it in 5 or 6 English texts, but no scholar had the nerve to cite where it came from. And I figured out that it's because that was all a back of the napkin translation of the text. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, is this real? Okay, and I had to set it up right. And it said, oh yeah, it's real. It went to the Internet Archive, pulled a 1912 German version of Table Talks and said, actually, it's 1038, it's right here. I click the link, it opens up Internet Archive, takes me to the book, takes me to the page. Boom, there it is, which is great because I still can't read it, even now. But we're not here without challenges or constraints. And I will say that these are for now, and we'll talk about why here in a little bit. One concept that is important is what's called the jagged frontier. This is a study from 2023 where they took 3 tasks that were unrelated but of equal difficulty, and they threw an AI tool at them. The AI tool for the first task, A+, 110%, it was tremendous. The second task, not even close. And the third task, we squeaked by with a C. In other words, the frontier of what is possible is uneven, but so is its advancement. So for the last 3 years, I've had a physical list in my office of a not yet list, and I'm running out of things on the not yet list every day. Or we have current challenges about reproducibility. In fact, the first technical paper that said we might be able to ask the same question twice and get the same answer is about 3 weeks old, which is really important for business. Hey, what's the right answer to this important question that we have to report to the SEC? It's important that you be able to get the same answer twice. We're figuring this out in real time. And in fact, I took this text from Martin Luther and I just said, can you translate this for me? Paste the picture. Can you translate this for me? Paste the picture. Can you translate this for me? Paste the picture. All in the same thread. And you can see everything in orange is a unique change. Now, granted, if I handed this to 3 people to translate, that would probably happen as well. But this is one of the current limitations that we experience. The second is about hallucinations. So this is where it will provide an answer with what seems to be confidence. And it's interesting because this is really the first technical paper that has said, we now understand really deeply why. It's about 3 weeks old. And here's one of the answers. Did you know that the way you build technology shapes how technology works? That was really one of the conclusions, right? And here's what they said. When you take the ACT and you don't know the answer to the question, what do? What do they tell you to do? C, C, right? Or B, or everybody's got their own little, but it's the same, right? Guess. These tools so far have been built to say, if you don't know, take your best shot, which can be helpful if it's the ACT and can be a problem if you say, what do these medical reports from my doctor mean? Right? But again, these are things that we're figuring out in real time. Or the other challenge is to have an alignment of the right tool in the right way and the right job. My colleague Chris Rosser and I, who wrote the book on AI in libraries, we've been going around to library conferences around the country, and we have them look up a historical event that didn't happen. And if you don't toggle on all the right things, they go, man, that riot was wild. You should have been there. It was a sight to behold. And if you turn on all the right things, they say, you know what? That didn't happen. And here's how I know it didn't happen. I looked here, 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 and here. And if you want to, you can just click. I got the link for you right here. If it did happen, it would have been right here. Same tool, same information, but the right tool in the right way for the right job. This is difficult. But now we have to think about the Reformation itself. There are a number of themes and challenges and concerns that I think are renewed, but in some ways transformed or maybe even made more complex by generative AI. The first is this idea of a priesthood of all believers. If you don't want to sleep, this is a great book for you. Here's what this says. In the world of social media and algorithms, we have been able to build a world, which an algorithm, by the way, is a form of AI, but it is not generative AI, right? In a world of algorithms, we have been able to put ourselves in silos. A historical event can happen, and depending on what TV station reports on that historical event, you have a very different understanding and experience of that shared reality. With generative AI, we have the ability to not create silos of individuals, of a collective, but to make a silo of one. Because generative AI can not only sort, but actually create the material within that silo. That's scary. It doesn't have to be scary. It can also be transformative. A silo of one in medicine changes the world and saves lives. You have this cancer, you have these things going on. This is the medicine, not for this cancer, but for you. That can be the most transformative thing you can imagine. But in the same way, it can be a horrifying reality. Or if we think about, we have this one text, right? This is where we come to get what we need. But currently we have a technology that produces infinite texts and no two are ever the same. How might this be a problem? Even if we're asking the same question, we may not all get the same answer. This is difficult. Or the third, as Jennifer pointed out, when it goes into each person's language, how good is it? How useful is it? How unintentionally unhelpful might it be? Or that each should read for themselves, right? The farmer in the field and the tailor, and even women. In a world where people aren't reading. The average American, by the way, reads at a 6th grade level. That means that the back of an ibuprofen bottle is difficult. This room is weird in relationship to the real world. Collectively in this room, we have read more books in the last 10 years than millions of Americans combined. our experience of the world is not the traditional experience of the world. And so access to more information, to more text, is not always a good thing when nobody engages text. Or even now with generative AI, you can just get the highlights, forget the actual text itself, which might be a problem. Can you imagine if Calvin's Institutes or Luther's works came in a 2-paragraph folio that you could hide in your hair? Well, I can't hide in my hair, but some people could. Or for the Reformation, we had transformations not across decades or even generations, but across centuries. One of the things that I find so interesting right now is that you will be surprised how much technical work in generative AI involves religious language. Not in like there's a deep religious, but like when the complexity and the implications of what we're grasping push us to that kind of imaginative space. One of the most interesting essays here is an essay called Machines of Loving Grace. And one of his arguments, this is the CEO of Anthropic, the makers of Claude, one of his arguments is that we are about to walk into the compressed century. What we would have done in 100 years, 10 years ago, we will now do in a decade. So what I thought my grandchildren were going to experience, I will before my 55th birthday. That's a weird world to live in. The Reformation has been hard enough to metabolize in 508 years. Or the power of persuasion, right? The spoken word, the propaganda, the cartoons, right? The children's texts have been so important to the way that the Reformation has functioned. And we already have generative AI tools that are more persuasive than human beings. Now, can you imagine how that could be great? One application that we're finding is that people who are coming out of cults are able to do so with a chatbot in a way that feels non-judgmental and safe, and it's found to be more effective than engaging with human beings. But can you imagine how that goes the other direction? Certainly. Or the question of authorship. We used to just have people sign Martin Luther's name to other things and run it anyway. Now we have to ask both by who and by what things are written. We used to have to ask about accelerating diffusion. It starts in Wittenberg and it moves throughout Europe. And now we just say, it doesn't matter where you look. Peekaboo, there it is. We also have to think about unintended consequences. One of my favorite texts about the Reformation asks an interesting question at the end. He said, do you think if Luther knew what would happen, he still would have nailed it on the door? If he would have known the way in which society would have been transformed, but also just all the violence, all the suffering, all the conflict, not for himself, but my gosh, how much blood has been spilt over the last half a millennium? How many relationships have been fractured? How many wonderful things have emerged? If he could see into the future, what would he have done? I think the challenge now is not only do we have unintended consequences, but we have just purely unknowable ones. We don't even know how to imagine, in some ways, what the future will hold. Now, I will say, in all of this, I am deeply optimistic for two reasons. One, while the capabilities of this technology are built by a subset of the human family, largely in Silicon Valley and other places, the implementation of this technology is up to us. And the other reason is that while not all players in this space are the same, the players that are worth watching are the ones who genuinely have the welfare and the flourishing of the human family in mind. I don't think it's unreasonable to say in 50 years we may not know what a disease is anymore. I'm for that world. Just personally, my dad is the fourth consecutive generation in my family to have Alzheimer's, and the first to have early onset Alzheimer's. And so his diagnosis was backdated to about his 58th birthday, which means if I'm fifth, I've got 16 years to figure out what I will do with my life and how I will care for my family. And I'll tell you that 72 months ago, I was losing sleep over this question. And I'll tell you that now I don't worry about it. I was never worried that my children would suffer from Alzheimer's, but I am no longer concerned about myself. I'm for that world, even though there are plenty of other things that I certainly have concerns about. I will say this, generative AI both keeps me up at night and gets me up in the morning. And that tension, I think we could say about the Reformation as well. I think there was enough that kept Calvin up at night and that got Calvin up in the morning. There was enough for Luther to want to go hide and enough for Luther to say, I'm not staying in this sabbatical any longer. Back to the work we go. And there are so many more that we could explore that touch both the themes and the challenges of the Reformation and the world that we're about to walk into. And in both the Reformation and now, I think we have this experience of promise and peril. But here's how this will work. It will not be promise over here and peril over here. And it will not be promise for you and peril for you. It will be each time you come to this technology, it will be promise and peril. I can use this to persuade people to things that will harm the human family, or I can use it to heal them. I can use this, as my high school boys would say, I can use this to ship it in or learn something. Right? I can use this to really leave a mark on the human family that takes a long time to heal, or to leave a mark that forecloses the opportunity for harm going forward. And both that promise and peril exist at the same time in every moment going forward. And this is why I have been running around in theological education saying, I can't do this by myself. I need an army of people who care about the world, who are ready to say, this is the future we demand. We won't take anything less. And by the way, we're not engineers. We have deeper questions about the flourishing of the human family. But if the Reformation has taught us anything, it's that there's no going back. The triumphant Lutheran service that we heard about in the sermon today still had the indulgence booth outside, right? You cannot unscramble that egg. However, while there is no going back, in the sense that we can undo what has occurred, there is this deep sense in which we must go back and learn so that we build the world that we want and that we need for our shared life. Here's my hunch. My hunch is that the way forward involves leveraging both the wisdom and the chaos and the mistakes of the past to build a better future. I think there are definitely some things we can learn about dropping a new technology on people and saying, I'm sure it's going to be great, and then it maybe not going so well, that we can use to inform the way that we navigate now. I think we've learned something about, well, if we just give people more information, it'll be better. I think we've learned some things about that that's not necessarily true. And I would much rather not repeat the mistakes of the past. I would much rather just chart a different future. If I can recommend one book to you first, it is this one. This is The Last Human Job by Allison Pugh. And one of the primary contributions of this book is a concept that she calls connective labor. This is the work of seeing and being seen. And what she says is that in a world of increasing automation, and it's a little bit about AI, it's a lot about automation in general, but everything she says that's coming is just coming faster than she says it's coming. What we have is a choice. And the choice is this: as the world of learning and work changes, will we make more space for connective labor? And will we do that only for some, or will we do it for all? We already see it for some. At a place like Emory, you're going to get a librarian if you have a question at Pitts. At the library of my alma mater, you're going to get a database search window. And there are value decisions behind those decisions. When someone on SNAP benefits needs help with their food card, press 2, press 4, press 5, please hold. When someone who has a hedge fund makes a phone call, someone picks up the phone. In medicine, we see the same. And part of what Allison does a wonderful job of doing is saying we can leverage the unstoppable wave of automation and technological change that is coming. We can stop it from destroying space for connective labor. We can actually build a world that is more connective than ever. Because look, there are parts of all of our work that we would gladly say, sure, knock that out for me. That'd be great. It's not hard for us to imagine like what we would gladly hand off. The question is, to what end will this technology be leveraged? And the last piece I'll leave you with here is from the anthropologist David Graeber. And I want to say something about this quote before we read it together. And I want us all to read this together. What Graeber is not saying is that it is easy to make a different world. The world we got was hard as hell to make. But it's just as easy to make the world we have as it is to make that new one. So if you would, say this with me. The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it is something we make and could just as easily make differently. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. We have a few minutes time. There is food and drink outside, so I know that's a motivation to get out of here. But if you have questions, comments, concerns for either of them, please raise them now and do so on the microphone.
Only nice things at the reception, so this is your only chance to ask.
It's critical now. Lou, yeah.
Just a question, you know, I worry about social media and what that's done to the country, what it's done to the kids. And, you know, there's some good in social media and there's not so good. But the same thing's going to happen with AI. You're going to have the folks like maybe in the United States that want to use it for the good. What about the Putins and the Xis and the, you know, the North Korea? What are they going to do with it? And how is that going to affect us?
Welcome to Promise and Peril, right? And the answer to this question is you cannot create a world that is absent of promise and peril, period. No technology can help you do that. No experience, no amount of money can help you do that, right? There is always promise and peril. The question then is, for those of us who are committed to promise, will we cede ground to peril? I think this is one of the questions that the Reformation helps us think about, actually, is to say, what we see of the world right now is not how we think it should be. And instead of just saying, this is terrible, they say, we're going to do something about it. We all are invited to and vulnerable to promise and peril. And I think the future is not going to be the ability to say you are immune or you are safe from peril, but it is to say that the invitation to promise is both more compelling and more accessible than ever before.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. I am curious if you could speak to some of the environmental impacts of AI. So far, I have mainly heard the arguments of peril regarding using AI in any form towards the environment. And I'm just hoping you can alleviate some of those concerns or speak some truth into them.
Yeah, here's the tension. You and I are used to things moving incrementally. So, have cars gotten more efficient? Have they gotten exponentially more efficient? No. My 2013 car gets about the same gas mileage as my friend's 2024 car, right? My friend's 2024 car doesn't get 500 miles to the gallon, right? It gets 1.5 miles to the gallon more than my 2013. With generative AI around energy, like water and energy, there are two things here. One, you can find whatever story you want to find. So you can find the story that's sensational and it's horrible, and you can find the story that it's not that big of a deal. And people tend to latch onto the stories that they appreciate. Here's the challenge, is that it moves so fast. So a ChatGPT query 6 months ago used 100 times, not 100%, 100 times more energy than it uses now. And so you might have seen, like this summer, an article from the New York Times that basically says, every time you query ChatGPT, you just like pour a bottle of water out on the ground. Like it was essentially the headline. The reality is it's about 5 milliliters of water, and it's in some of the most efficient water systems on the planet. And you can imagine that they're not just running it out the drain like you and I do a shower. But there's a tension in technology, and this is called Jevons paradox. Jevons paradox says, when it becomes more efficient to use a technology, demand explodes. When we figured out how to make cars on an assembly line, what happened to cars? Everybody got one, right? So while a ChatGPT query is 100 times more efficient than it was 6 months ago, demand grows 250% every 90 days. There are genuine questions about the environment. The other piece I'll tell you here is that not all players are the same. Google and Microsoft have been largely carbon neutral for years. And everything Elon Musk touches poisons everybody within a radius of where it is. So part of it is to not extrapolate one character to the whole space. The other thing I would say is if you're worried about energy and water with AI, you need to contextualize that with other energy and water use. So if you're really nervous about how much energy AI uses, I assure you that all of the AI I have used in the last month is less than the Zoom call streaming this meeting. And they're both running through the same data center. Or it's certainly less than the Netflix I've been watching while I worked on this lecture. And if you're nervous about water, don't ask how much water it takes to get a hamburger. So I share concerns about environmental impact, but it is important, especially as people of faith, that we share those concerns in good faith with good information. And here's the other reason. Silicon Valley would love nothing more than what some sociologists call a legitimizing nemesis, which is where you say something really confidently that makes you look really stupid. And then Silicon Valley says, see, we knew the seminary people would be mad about this. So if you want to move into their world, go for it. But if you want to move into the world that we're building, come on. And the only way not to become that legitimizing nemesis is to actually know what you're talking about. And to actually say not only I have concerns, but I have up-to-date information. And that's really hard in a technology that moves all the time. So it's difficult. But I don't think, at least for now, it's nearly as bad as the reporting shows.